but you know, this is a really unusual time. It's March 19th, and for a lot of us, you know, this has been a first full week really of being locked down because of the coronavirus epidemic. So it's a really big adjustment to a lot of people's lives. I know there's a lot of anxiety going on just in people's personal lives, and it's a really unprecedented time, unprecedented situation. So it is a unique opportunity for us to get together virtually in ways that we haven't done very much before. So thanks for joining me, whether you're joining me because you're a little bored and you want some company, hey, that's great. Or if you just really wanted to get some information to your students. If you're an educator about the media bias chart, perhaps you use this in your classes, perhaps you're a librarian, or perhaps you're just personally interested in this topic, or maybe it's some combination of all of that. So in any case, I'm really excited for you to be joining me here today. And with that, I'm going to kick it off and cover intro to the media bias chart. We're going to go over definitions and the methodology. So as you know, the media bias chart has been circulating around the internet in one form or the other since about December 2016 is when that first version I put out there, and it really went viral. So since then, it's gone through a number of different variations. Just for a little bit of background, when I first created the media bias chart, it was in response to my perceptions in the run up to the 2016 election that people were sharing news articles that were highly biased and really unreliable. And people who are very smart, successful, kind, all these things, even those folks would share really low quality and highly biased articles, and they use it to argue with people that they disagree with on Facebook. They'll say, here, I'm going to prove my point. Here's this terrible article. And it was shocking to me that people would share these kinds of things. And I thought it would be helpful to talk to my friends on Facebook by creating something visual to map out the media landscape. So I came up with the first version of the media bias chart, and it went very viral. That first version was just really me, sitting and thinking about the news and how I could make it visual and appealing to people. And I put it on, I thought about it for a few weeks and put it on the internet as a hobby. I like to say it's because I'm a really big nerd that I would do such a thing for a hobby, but it took off. And that's why so many of you are on this call today, because you've seen it somewhere on the internet, and it turned out to be really helpful for folks. But the complaint that I would get at the very beginning, which is valid, was that this chart was biased because I'm biased. And I thought that's absolutely true, because I'm a human being, I'm biased, and if you're a human, that's just how it is. So given that we're all humans, but this is still useful, how could we possibly make this better and make this more useful to minimize the bias, to increase agreement around it, and create a kind of standard for people to be able to assess reliability and bias. So at first, it was just lots of input from really thoughtful commentators, journalists, academics, laypersons, just saying, I think this source should be moved up or down or left and right, and here are the reasons. People get very passionate about this topic. So some people, on the left and the right would just attack the credibility of the chart and say, this is all a bunch of mainstream BS, or this is everything's too far to the center is too far to the left, or it's too far to the right. But the more we can make this system granular, and I'll talk about that, what I mean by granular, in a minute, the more we can agree. So over time, I developed the chart and came out with various different iterations, but it wasn't really until last year that we were able to use multiple analysts from across the political spectrum to rate news sources along a standard methodology. And I know some of my analysts are on the call here today, so thanks for joining. And I'm always, always, always so, so grateful for your work. We'll talk about exactly how we do that. At the end of 2018, we did a crowdfunding campaign. And I know I recognize a lot of your names. Many of you contributed to that, and so very grateful. We raised $32,000 to create, to hire some analysts and to create some software tools to implement this multi-analyst ratings project and come out with improved versions of the media bias chart that were backed by a lot more data. And that's what we did pretty much throughout all of last year. So let me just talk about where the media bias chart is today, what the categories mean, go through some definitions to orient you and to orient students, anyone that's new to it, to the whole system. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share an image here. Okay, and this is can everybody see this? It's a blank version of the media bias chart 4.0. If somebody could just let me know in chat if you could see that. Awesome. All right. So I'm going to go over the, all right. Can you see my mouse too?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to focus on this vertical axis right here. This said quality before on previous versions. Actually, I'm going to change the share and share something else. Okay. So here's a newer version. Can you all see that? The media bias chart 5.0 blank. Yes, all right, perfect. So actually, I'm just gonna stay on this one. We talk about overall source reliability. Now, the definition reliability is an important one. What we mean by reliable is what sources can you most often rely to be factually informed, truthfully informed, widely and deeply informed about things that are important to you and society. So there's a multi-part definition there. So go over a couple of those things. Truthfully, of course, that's super important, but it's not the only thing. Widely, and making sure that there's a breadth of facts, a breadth of facts and a breadth of coverage. Deeply, how much detail does a story give you when it goes into the facts, and then it's about things that are important. So there are things that are more important to cover. There are things that are less important to cover. But what we generally mean by important is they're important to you and and your society. So your community, your people around you, right? So things can be like truthful and very detailed, but maybe they're gossip about a celebrity, and that's not necessarily important to you and your community. That's just an example of something that would be rated a little lower, even though it was truthful. Okay, so why we choose reliability as a metric? It's analogous to what's newsworthy. These are all terms that don't have great definitions historically. What's newsworthy just tends to be like what everybody is covering. But I think what people can rely on to be most truthfully, factually, deeply, widely, broadly informed about things that are important to you and to society. That's a good definition of reliable. Okay. And that informs what this whole vertical axis is about. We have 8 categories of reliability, and I'm going to go through what they mean. But why do we even have 8 categories of reliability? What we want to do with a media bias chart taxonomy, this whole system in the first place, is throw out this old binary definition of news versus opinion. Now, a lot of folks are used to referring to things as news versus opinion, but I submit to you that that is not sufficient for talking about the news landscape that we deal with today. Not everything is neatly divided cleanly, even within the good stuff that we read, into a news section and an opinion section. There are certain publications that do that, like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the Washington Post will say, this is news and this is opinion. But they don't even really do that. They'll say this is opinion, and then everything else is, can be labeled or not labeled. Some things are labeled as perspective or analysis or lifestyle. So it's not just that there's two things, news and opinion. So that's not even a realistic definition in the first place for our good news. We are creating more specific categories. I'll go through those in a second. But that's just for the stuff that's acceptable in like the top part of the chart. That's like scores 24 through 64 on this vertical axis here. Everything above 24 is what we consider acceptable. Below that, there are a lot of reasons that news can be bad, even if it's not fake. So again, we want to throw out this binary of real news versus fake news. Now, within the media literacy, news literacy community, the community has done a good job, a better job of coming up with terminology that describes information that's not ideal. So it's not just fake news. Most people don't even just use a fake news terminology anymore. They'll say things like false news for something that's really false, like a hoax. But the terms like misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, those are all useful as well for describing news that's less than ideal. But what we do that's unique in the media bias chart taxonomy, by taxonomy I just mean system of classification, is that we have categories from the most reliable down to the worst. So we have good, okay, and bad, essentially. So what makes things good, okay, and bad? What we've got here at the very top is our two categories: original fact reporting and fact reporting. So original fact reporting, this is the work that journalists do, going out and getting stories, making phone calls, doing interviews, going to the scene, looking at primary sources and documents, looking at court filings, those kinds of things. Now, the reason we value this at the very top of our reliability axis is because, even though there are other sources that are very good below that are really important in our news ecosystem, none of them would exist without the work of journalists. If you're familiar with the first version of the media bias chart, I kind of had it switched around before, where the analysis types of articles would be at the top and the fact reporting would be below that. But I figured that was probably incorrect, just because without the work of journalists and the spread of the actual information that they track down, none of the analysis would even exist. Okay, so we've got original fact reporting at the top, and below that is fact reporting. What's the difference? Fact reporting is just the re-reporting of the original journalist's work. Often that's done by re-verifying the story that somebody initially broke, or sometimes it's just just redistributing it. Okay, so the wire services like AP and Reuters, their business is just putting journalists on the ground, getting reports, and they syndicate that through networks of other newspapers. And that re-reporting of it is also very important, and that's what we call fact reporting. Okay, but both of those are good. Both of those are important. Complex analysis and analysis. So you'll see where I'll just deal with these three categories in succession: complex analysis, and opinion that is fair persuasion. So what is the difference between all of these things? A list of facts is very factual, like a weather report or reports about, like a virus, like who, what, when, where. How many people were affected? Where are they? What happened to them? All those things are just the facts. But most of the content that we read is not just the facts. It's also infused with and interspersed with a little bit of context and some conclusions about what it means. That's done for a couple reasons in journalism. One, it makes it a little bit easier to digest, and it's helpful to have context to understand the world around us and what certain facts mean. But the fewer facts and the more context and conclusions there are, the less it's news and the more it's opinion. So let's go back and look at this. For complex analysis, these kinds of stories are stories where you have facts, and then conclusion and some context, okay? An analysis story would have fewer facts and more context and conclusions, okay? Opinions would have some facts, but then a lot of conclusions, all right? That's the difference between the three. And it's really hard for people to tell. That's why it's really difficult for people to differentiate between analysis and opinion. And you want to be able to differentiate that for yourself. Let me back up and give you a little bit of an analogy to try to differentiate them for yourself. So think about the participants in a court system. In the court system, you have like a detective who could be a fact witness, and the detective would tell you, this is what happened, who, what, when, where, okay? If you go down to opinion, that's what the lawyers do, okay? So they take the facts, and these facts are true. They're working with the same set of facts, but they're going to draw conclusions that favor one side or the other based on those facts. So most of the stuff that the lawyers say is going to be opinion. What is in the middle there is what a judge does. Complex analysis and analysis, okay? So the job of the judge is to take all the facts and try to be as fair as possible and still come up with what it means, a fair interpretation of what it means, okay? So that's kind of a hard thing to do. But when you're looking at a news story, if you're trying to figure out, is it original fact reporting? Is it analysis? Is it opinion? Think of it as, is this really a detective trying to tell me what happened, just the facts? Is this a lawyer trying to give me their opinion and trying to influence what I think about the facts? Or is this a judge that's taking as fair as possible a look at the facts and then giving me a call one way or the other on this, okay? So this part is, again, hard for people to differentiate, but I think it's super important because once you get down into opinion, you're not really in news anymore. It's not really that, it's not as important as the fact reporting that journalists do. Opinion stuff is a dime a dozen. It's cheap to make opinions. It's easy to make opinions. Anybody can, read the news, be at home, write a blog about what they think about the news, right? There's lots of analysis out there, okay? A lot of what I do is analysis, right? So again, you don't really need to have the infrastructure and do the work of a journalist in order to go, be a journalist and put out real fact reporting. Opinions and analysis flood our media landscape because they're cheaper and easier to produce, okay? So what's less valuable than even this opinion stuff? Because some of the opinion stuff, it's important. There's nothing wrong with opinion inherently. That's how people can advocate for their positions. That's how people can advocate for progress, advocate for rights, advocate for political positions. And there's certainly a place for that. But just know that advocating for a position is not the same as news. And too much of that today is conflated, especially when you have lots of opinions on channels, namely that are lots and lots of opinion, even though they're 24-hour news networks, okay? Below that, we have selective or incomplete stories and unfair persuasion. So this is where the line between what's fair and unfair it starts to fall apart. When there are facts in there that the presence of which would have made a difference for changing one's opinion, that falls into selective or complete, incomplete, and unfair persuasion. Other things that can comprise unfair persuasion are things like hyperbolic language and name calling, things like that. Those also get measured under bias, but typically something that's very biased, also because of the language, tends to be unfair as well. Then below that, we've got a section called propaganda and or contains misleading information. Okay, so propaganda, we have a broad definition of it. It's not, it's when the news content that you're, one of the definitions is when the news content that you're reading is just strongly, fiercely advocating for one position at the to the detriment of another position, and not giving the other position any credence at all. It doesn't have to be government sponsored or government created to fall under the definition of propaganda. It's not just like, you know, World War II, Nazi Germany, you know, messaging. That's not the only kind of propaganda that there is. This can be just fierce advocating masquerading as news, okay? And then contains misleading information. It doesn't mean the whole thing has to be misleading, but if you've got one or two key facts in there that are misleading, it can fall in this category as well. And then below that is contains inaccurate or fabricated information. So this is where misinformation, disinformation, and fake news falls in. So notice that most of this chart actually deals with news is not fake news. It's, you know, just the scores from 0 to 8 are the categories where there's really this fake news, but there's lots of stuff in here that's not fake, but is junk news for other reasons. Let me just jump to the left to right, the horizontal axis here, spend a little bit of time on bias, and talk about what these categories mean, okay? We've got in the middle, something we call neutral or balanced bias. Now, people get confused by what we mean by something being in the middle here. Being in the middle can mean three things. One, it's neutral, meaning the article doesn't take a position one way or another on a topic. A second thing could be balanced, and so that's mentioned here as well, meaning the article equally shows two sides of the same issue, okay? A third is centrist. Now, centrist is an actual political position, meaning like a compromise between the two parties, right? So we have skews left, skews right, hyperpartisan left, hyperpartisan right, most extreme left, most extreme right. What's important to know about the bias categories is that they are grounded in United States, contemporary, positions of elected officials. Okay, I'm going to go over that again. United States. Why? Because this has to be geographically bounded. This is not a universal left to right. Left to right politics in France or Saudi Arabia would certainly be different from left to right politics in the United States. Two, it's contemporary. Again, there's no universal left and right time-wise. So if you look at what was left and right 50 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 6 months ago even, those things shift really quickly over time. Just a couple of examples. So same-sex marriage being legal used to be a hyper-partisan left position in the United States, and now it's just a maybe slightly left position. It's the law of the land now. So neutral to skews left. So that changes over time. Building a wall to keep out immigrants on our southern border was a hyper-partisan to the most extreme right that really wasn't talked about as an issue before our current president. But now it's more of like a skews right, hyper-partisan right, like right in the middle contemporary Republican politics position, because most have adopted, our elected officials, namely our president, has adopted that. So this is anchored in the positions of our elected officials. Why is it anchored like that? It's because there are several things that we could have use to try to anchor what's left and right in this country. You could use what politicians say, you could use what the media says, or you can use what people say, okay? So the reason we didn't use what people say, like the citizens say, is because it's really amorphous and hard to measure. I mean, you have to measure like what everybody is saying at all times in polls, in the conversations, in conversations on social media even, and that's really hard to pin down. That we don't use what the media is saying to judge what's left and right because we're measuring the media itself. But we are anchoring based on what U.S. political elected officials say, because those things are documented. You can see what they say on TV. You can see what they have written on their website platforms. You can see what the Democratic and Republican national parties have written down as their platforms every 4 years. And so the skews right, hyperpartisan right is anchored by Republican, like mainstream Republican politician positions, and what anchors left is mainstream Democratic policy, elected official policy positions right now, okay? If you think about what this line is between hyperpartisan right and most extreme right, that is really, think about the most extreme elected official. So think about the most extreme right-wing elected official, like say in Congress, and the positions that person takes, okay? The news sometimes will take even more right-wing positions than that. So anything that fell outside of that would be on this most extreme right, okay? Same thing with most extreme left. Think about the most liberal, the most left-wing elected US official and what their positions are, and then anything that's more left than that would rank outside of that position-wise, okay? So let me just go, I'm sure you're tired of seeing this blank chart. Let's see the good stuff, okay? Let's see the actual, where these sources actually land, right? Hold on, let me pull that up real quick. Hold on. Okay, so here's an, can you all see this actual, perfect, media bias chart? So we've got these sources all spread out here, and there's a lot of them. I know you're familiar with this. I know you've seen them. But what these are based on are the average scores of individual articles. So they're not a straight average. They're actually weighted averages. I'm going to take you over to the interactive media bias chart to show what we mean, because these logos are spread out and colored nicely so they don't overlap too much. We don't have all the news sources on here because there's only about 85 on this particular chart. They are, there's thousands and thousands of news sources. We have about 130 of them rated, and I'll show you where you can find the rest of those. But let me just pop on over to the interactive media bias chart. Hold on. Okay, can you see my interactive media bias chart? Yes, no? Anybody?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes.
Interactive media bias chart. Perfect. Okay, so as you can see on this version, they overlap a little bit because they're on their actual scored coordinates. So if you haven't seen this before, we have a lot of these sources listed here at the bottom. Okay, I think not everyone can see the whole page. Yeah, I'm gonna have to scroll up and down through this page, so hopefully you can see my scrolling. We've got a bunch of different sources here, and I'm gonna click on this button. It says toggle articles, okay? Each one of these dots represents an article that we rated for these sources. So some of these articles belong to some of these sources. As you'll see, some individual articles got scores way out here in the corners. Like practically zero. Some of them got zeros. Some of them got all the way most extreme left and most extreme right. And then there's ones that are all the way top middle. But notice, because not every single source is all fake news, or like, you know, even our best sources are AP and Reuters. It's not that every single source is, you know, the completely only original fact reporting without any analysis at all and right in the middle. It's just that that's what most of their stories are. Like, same thing with these things on the bottom left or on the bottom right. It's not like they're all fake news all the time. They've got a variety in quality and bias. So if you take a look at, let's take a look at a few here. Let's go through, let's look at the New York Times. Okay, so the New York Times, notice that there's quite a spread. Now, when people talk about, you know, bias in mainstream news outlets, usually what they're referring to is, you know, this kind of sample spread, where the New York Times does have quite a bit of left-leaning opinion content, in addition to all of its highly, you know, unbiased fact reporting based stories. When you have a mix of these things, people, if you're on the right, you tend to focus on the stuff over here and say, you know, the whole New York Times shouldn't be up here, you know, because you've seen stuff that's down here. And you can see why people have different views based on their own political positions. This becomes really apparent when you look at MSNBC, CNN, and Fox. So let's look at MSNBC over here. Now, these are just MSNBC TV shows. We do not rate MSNBC online because a lot of their online content is just clips from the TV shows. So you'll see that there's a spread here. Lots of, you know, left-leaning opinion, hyper-partisan left, and then stuff that's analysis and skews left over here, for an overall rating of hyper-partisan left in between analysis and opinion. When you look at CNN cable, it's actually not too far away from where MSNBC was. You see that? So if you look at CNN cable, people say, oh, well, CNN is, you know, very left-wing. And if you look at the shows, you can see where you get that kind of impression. You've got sources that are, shows that are hyperpartisan left, skews left, that are squarely in this analysis and opinion range. But others will say, you know, CNN, they really cover a lot of news online. And if you look at their online coverage, it's actually quite a bit higher to the middle, because lots of articles are in this top middle section. And then you've got your left-leaning opinion column. So you've got CNN close to kind of where, CNN online anyways, close to where the New York Times is, okay? So you see a similar thing on Fox News. So Fox News online, okay? Fox News online is heavier in opinion content and skewing right content. In analysis and opinion than the comparable online for CNN. And then for Fox News cable, it's a bit farther down and to the right because you've got shows that are, you know, up here, complex analysis, that are just a little bit, you know, actually quite neutral, maybe just a little bit skews right. These would be shows like, I know Shep Smith was one of the ones that we rated last year. It's no longer there, but America's Newsroom is another one. And then shows that are more down here are like Sean Hannity, Justice with Judge Jeanine, things like that. So if you, the reason it's important to look at individual shows and individual articles is the more granular we get, the more people tend to agree on their on the individual show and article placement. Where people get very defensive about their own shows is based on the things that come to mind for them when they're defending their own side's shows. So as an example, if you look at MSNBC over here and Fox News over here, not all shows are the same, okay? So if you're on MSNBC if you like MSNBC, you might think that when you're saying MSNBC is a good news source, you're probably thinking about the stuff that you've seen here that's reputable, just a little bit left, but it's complex analysis, it's factual, there's nothing misleading about it, right? You think about that stuff. But if you are on the right and you think about MSNBC, you might think about this show where there was something a little bit selective or misleading, and it was very, very far to the left. Same thing if you're on the left and you think about the stuff you see on Fox, okay? And now, note that these are not symmetrical. We had the same analysts rate all these things. We had, for each show, we had an analyst from left, right, and center look at each one of the shows and each one of the articles, okay? And the scores were the average of the three. So we would have a left-leaning person and a right-leaning person look at this article right here, and they'd say, with a pretty good degree of confidence, this is skews right analysis. Okay, that's a really important part about our methodologies, that people tend to agree even though they disagree politically. Okay, so there is some more content on Fox News cable that falls into the propaganda, misleading, and a very extreme right versus the MSNBC examples. So when people complain about false equivalence, we're not showing that things are equivalent on each side at all. We're just trying to take every piece of content that comes in, evaluate it the same way, and let the shows and the articles inform where we place the actual news sources, okay? So just wrapping that up here, when folks say that, when folks on the right say, you know, Fox News isn't all that bad, they have got some good content, they're right, especially if they're thinking about this stuff right here, that it just skews right and it's factual and you know, nothing misleading about it. But if you're on the left and you think about the worst examples on Fox News, then you're more likely, more inclined to say that it's garbage. So essentially both people are right? Keep that in mind when you're talking to people that you disagree with. Get as specific as possible about the articles, and you'll find that you have grounds to agree. All right. I'm going to leave it there for the moment. Let me put it on, you know, another source. If you want to see information about each individual news source, you can go here, because we have them, all the sources that we have listed alphabetically, and we've got them, let's see, we've got their overall score, and then we've got their individual article scores that we've rated along here. Oh, let me show you one more thing. Can you still see my my screen where it says CART, content analysis rating tool?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I wanted to show you how, just a little bit of insight onto how our analysts rate news sources. And this is this is also what we have available for a 30-day free trial for educators all across the country. Without a credit card, we want to be able to provide this resource for everybody. We allow people to rate articles just like our analysts do. Okay, so this is a simple version of how we rate articles. An article would pop up right here, okay, that we'd selected. Okay, so can you see that it popped out into a Fox News article? Hopefully you can see that. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, and you'd go ahead and read through that, and then our analysts go through and give it a overall reliability score, overall bias score, and then, you know, submit. And, you know, I won't accept this because I haven't actually gone through and rated this particular article, but we do that. Our analysts also can do these with, our analysts don't just do the simple, they don't do the simple methodology. We do a more complex methodology for rating individual articles, where we take into account. So here's a Huffington Post article. about, it says Joe Biden says Trump should just shut up about coronavirus, leave it to the experts, okay? So our analysts would rate individually the expression on a scale of 0 to 64, the headline and graphic on a scale of 0 to 64, the veracity, meaning the truthfulness, on a scale of 0 to 64, and then an overall reliability score. And then they would take into consideration a comparison to other news articles. They take into consideration the language that's used, take into consideration the political position that we talked about earlier, and then give it an overall bias score, okay? So that's how our analysts go about rating this. This is how we have methodology and instructions for teaching students how to rate this, and that's how we do it. All right, again, I'm gonna leave it there, leave it open for questions. So go ahead and fire away. If you've got anything that's burning that you wanted to ask, please take yourself off mute and share.
Just one small thing.
Yeah.
This is Joel.
Hi, Joel.
Looking at this from my aged eyes, when I print it out on an 8.5 by 11 sheet, I can't make out the borders.
Okay. So thanks for that feedback. On our next version, we're going to revert back to some darker borders to make it a little bit clearer, and we're going to make some adjustments to the numerical scale so we don't have as much white space there. I know some of the earlier versions were a little bit easier to see, so it was just a matter of trying to balance out the new scoring system with some better graphics, but we're constantly trying to improve that. So look for version 6.0 here in the next little bit, ideally that has improved visuals.
Could you by chance do something on configurability of the line weight?
Yes.
Great. I'll shut up now.
I know, thanks for the feedback, I appreciate it. Any other questions?
I have a question. I
Yes.
don't know if you can see me. Oh, hi. Will you ever, I couldn't tell from any of the names of the newspapers, but will you include any international newspapers like Al Jazeera?
We do have Al Jazeera rated. That is on our, let's see, let me pull that up here. It's on a version of, hold on. It's on a version of our interactive chart, and I'm just gonna allow it to load. So, but while it loads, let me tell you about how we do international versions. We have a few international news sites. We have some like, oh, hold on, let me just pull it up. Okay, it's right in there.
Yeah, I see it.
It's hard to see. Yeah. So this is like an alt view too. It's not ideal for being able to see it. You know, we have kind of limited tools for this interactive version that we're working on improving. This is not like a custom, software solution for us, but we're working on building that here over time. But we do have the individual news sources rated under here, so Al Jazeera is in there. We have things like BBC and The Economist, which are UK-based publications. The Guardian is as well. So we only cover sources like this to the extent that they significantly cover US politics. And we cover it from the point of view of what are they saying about us, US politics, to a United States audience. So we go to aljazeera.com/US, whatever that default site is for the US, and we look at what they're saying about US politics. This, because it has to be geographically bounded. So same thing about like Economist stories about the United States to a United States audience, or BBC stories about the United States to a United States audience. Because like what we see here is not necessarily what the same thing that like the BBC audience in the UK will see. So, we might, BBC News in the United States about the United States tends to be quite neutral. Same thing with Al Jazeera. Most international sources tend to be somewhat neutral about what they tell us about our own politics. There are exceptions to that. For example, North Korean news or Russia Today. Those would not necessarily be neutral towards what they're telling U.S. audiences and what they're showing U.S. audiences. But that's the lens we view it from. So we're not. So people from the UK might say, no, the BBC is totally biased, and that may be true for what the BBC tells British audiences about UK politics, right? Or Al Jazeera, to somebody who lives in the Middle East, might have biases about the regional geopolitics of that area that are not apparent to us. So we're not looking at that, we're just looking at it from the US point of view. So we can cover some international sources on the United States chart, but when it comes to rating international sources, we're going to be making, and we're working on making country-specific charts. So Canadian news sources for a Canadian chart, Balkan region sources for Balkan region chart, things like that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Question.
Yeah.
Can we assume that the names of the like the New York Times falls on the chart, is placed on the chart at the midpoint of its own name?
Yes.
That's good. Thank you.
Yes, especially on the interactive version. So it can be slightly off for some sources on that static version that you have. So because on that static version, you'll notice that some of the logos are a little offset. So at the most, they're plus or minus 4 points from their actual score. But we did our best to limit that, so it's usually not more than plus or minus 2, and that they are all correct relative to the ones that are nearest to them.
Good, thanks.
Just hard managing all the space. So. Any other questions?
Did you really think this was going to go this far when you first started?
No, I accidentally made a whole new job for myself. So, but I love it, and I think it's important, and it became really apparent that people wanted more of this. What we envision is doing news content ratings to be useful for lots of different applications. So it's nice that we rate the news, like that's what we do. And then people come to our site and see where we've rated them. But I think what's even more important is that we teach people to rate the news. So you rate the news, because there's always going to be new news sources, and we just need to have the news literacy skills as a society to catch up with our new information environment. I'm optimistic that we can do that. But not everybody is going to have the privilege of being in one of your classes or taking a webinar like this, or you might not even be interested in doing this. So it's also important for us to be able to apply news content ratings in other settings. So, ideally news aggregators could surface content that has been rated well along the lines of what we do with a third-party news content rating system. Social media algorithms could make decisions on what they show and share and block based on content ratings. Advertisers can make better decisions about what they choose to advertise on and not advertise on based on this, because a lot of these news delivery systems are broken right now, and it's hurting our entire society. I know I don't have to talk about that too much. I think you guys get that, and that's why you're here on the call.
Yep.
All right. Well, we're almost.
I'm sorry, I have one more question and kind of a comment. I mean, I think today it's more and more popular, or with me it is, to go on sites like Amazon. And a lot of times, you know, that's how I'll determine a purchase, because I always read the reviews.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see, wow, it got 9,000 reviews. Well, this one, and it says Amazon's Choice on it, so it has to be. But
Mm-hmm.
what do you think? I mean, a lot of times I read the reviews and they're written very conscientiously, thoughtful, and they'll have pictures.
Mm-hmm.
They'll include pictures that show, look, you know, this is where it tore or something. Right. So what do you have to, I mean, this is just the way we're going, and what do you have to say about that?
Well, you know, there's a difference between, you know, actually analyzing, like the thoughtful analysis of news content, which we're rating here, and opinion polling on it, right? So the name of our company is called AdFountas, which is Latin for to the source. And that's because we look at the source itself. We look at the content itself and analyze it along this rubric, along with this methodology. Okay, that's really different from what exists out there right now, which is mostly opinion polling. There's a lot of opinion polling about the trust that people have in news sources, but that doesn't often tell you what you need to know. So if you ask somebody, do you trust MSNBC? Well, if it's a left-leaning person, they'll say yes, and if it's a right-leaning person, they'll say no. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't really tell you much about the content itself. It tells you about the person. So the more we can look at the pictures and the words of the sentences, the structure, those things that are in there, the more we can have like a third party, like unbiased as possible kind of analysis. So that's what we want to focus on, rather than just having people, you know, vote on stuff. That's certainly a component that you can take into account. But you want to make sure you're drawing the lines between, is somebody really thoughtfully reviewing this, or is somebody just giving their snap judgment about it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
All right.
Vanessa, how has this project met your expectations? Are you doing this exclusively as a career, or do you have something else also?
I would like to do this exclusively eventually. I think there's just a lot of need for it, and I think it can do a lot of good in the world. We started as a business two years ago. We have, you know, a handful of products out there, licenses. People publish this in textbooks, and do speaking engagements and things like that. And we have our software tool for educators. But you know, that's just getting off the ground right now. I mean, just really within the last 4 months or so. I'm a practicing patent attorney. I still am a practicing patent attorney. So, you know, it's not, and our analysts work on a volunteer basis right now. Our developers work on a volunteer basis right now. So we can't, you know, keep that up forever. So we do need to turn this into a sustainable business. But that is my goal. I would like to do that. It's a interesting, challenging time right now, especially just because of all the uncertainty in the world. But we're going to keep doing what we're doing as we are right now, and then hopefully in the future we can grow, and this can be, you know, the premier third-party news rating company and service out there, kind of like a JD Power Consumer Reports of the news.
And how is this being picked up in school? This project, I thank you so much. It's so timely and so necessary. And I can see this being in schools to teach kids literacy on the media. People got to think for themselves, and it's so important. Is this being picked up by a lot of schools?
Yeah, I mean, we have a couple dozen customers from schools across the country, in colleges and in high schools, that have been using our content analysis rating tools program. The media bias chart itself is used, I know, in thousands of classrooms all across the country. I mean, we have over 1,000. We've had over 1,000 customers total over the last 2 years or so. And that's everyone from somebody buying a license to a monthly membership to have access to all the updates. So yeah, people are picking it up, and I sent out an email a couple days ago that you all saw, just offering it for free without a credit card, and I had a dozen educators take me up on that just in the last 24 hours. So that was exciting to see. I think there really is a need for it.
No, thank you again for this.
Vanessa, just a
Yes.
quick question. I'm using the chart in a presentation that I do with the League of Women Voters, and the kids are really interested in it. But we, after doing it for high school seniors, we wanted to have some sort of interactive way. It's only a 1-hour program, so we can't do anything real in depth, but we thought we would get them to show an empty chart and get them to say where they get their news and to place it on the chart in the place that they would have normally placed it. But what if it's something like Facebook, where they get all their news from? That's not on your chart, so there's no comparison really that we can.
Right. Yeah, so the more, you've got to get really granular about the content that you're rating. Even an entire source, to place an entire source, think about the sample that you're thinking about. It's a huge sample. If you say place the New York Times, you know, how many articles have you read in the New York Times? And you're just thinking about the top ones that kind of come to mind and giving a general overall sense. For Facebook, it's even more difficult because not only have you seen lots of different content, but the content that you've seen is different from the content anybody else has seen. So for a short session like that, a short activity, I would pick 3 articles about the same topic. Okay, so you can do this with our cart platform. Okay, you can try to get folks set up, and you can just set yourself up on it so that you're the one, like you are the only one that has an account on there, and you can pull up the 3 articles and maybe give everybody the 3 articles, one left, one right, one center. We have samples that you can use, and we can talk offline about this, but have them rate each one of the articles. And it doesn't have to be like on our super in-depth methodology. You can say, all right, based on just reading these 3 and looking at the definitions of the chart, where would you put this? Does this fit in opinion? Does this fit in propaganda? Does this fit in fact reporting? And where does it fall left and right? And you can generate a good discussion about that in an hour for sure.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, email me if you have any questions about that. All right,
I'll do it.
All right. Okay, I know that people have to drop off because it's been an hour. I've got to get going myself as well. And all right, cool. I thank you all for your comments. Please feel free to leave more in the chat. Feel free to email me. And I thank you all for being here. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.